Welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, thank you so much, Andy.
Just to begin with, as is sort of tradition for our show, what we normally do is just get the guests to explain their background and kind of walk us through from their professional roots through to the current day, if you don't mind.
No, not at all. So, I'm a performance chef. I used to work on super yachts, so working for kind of the top CEOs, and that led me into kind of looking at how food affected their performance. And I left yachting and sometimes wonder why I did when I live in the UK. And went to St Mary's University to do a course in sports nutrition. And then, yeah, set up my company and ended up working with some pretty cool elite athletes.
Was it sort of very accidental, the transition into sport, or was it something you were kind of aiming for?
No, it was definitely something I was aiming for because I felt like I'd reached the ceiling in kind of my yachting career, and I got to work with some incredible athletes whilst being in yachting. And I think it saddened me how they viewed food. And it looked very boring and there was no engagement with it. And I just thought, we need to do something about this. So yeah, while I was still in yachting, and it was around the time of COVID, I went to university and kind of wanted to learn more of the science behind sports nutrition and just see how you actually practically apply that to a dish that people are going to love. So no, it was definitely an area that I was really, really, really interested in, and like I love sport and I love food and wanted to bridge the gap between the two.
I'm curious as to sort of when you first knew about the role of a performance chef, and the reason I say that is when I started my career when I was a strength and conditioning intern, way back, there wasn't really performance chefs as far as I was aware. I worked at a rugby club and they had catering essentially, and I think around that time for a lot of teams you had someone maybe looking after nutritionists. Hopefully you had a dietitian or a nutritionist, or maybe there was a strength coach with an interest. And then it was kind of trial and error and a bit of luck as to whether you as a team found a chef that was good nutritionally, not just at cooking, but actually from a health and performance perspective. So yeah, I'm just wondering, when did you become aware of the performance chef role specifically?
To be honest, I don't think I was aware of it. It wasn't even when I kind of started out on my own. It wasn't an industry that I was actually aware of, but it was, it was, how can I put this? I'd been kind of flown to different places in the world to cook for different athletes, and all I could see was there was a need for this. There was, an actual need for this role to be filled because one client was working with an amazing nutritionist, but they just said that the food bored, they were bored by it. And I just thought, well, how can we change that? How can we make that evolve? And then I think I became more aware of it when I started to guest teach at the university, and people who were doing a master's in sports nutrition, I was taking them into the kitchen to show them how they practically applied what they were learning into dishes. And they'd be coming up to me afterwards and saying, "Oh, I want to become a chef." And I was like, "Oh, that's brilliant." And I thought, don't throw away all those amazing years that you've just spent doing your masters, but how can you use that knowledge to enhance, your clients' kind of goals? So yeah, I don't know when I actually realized, and I suppose now with things like Instagram, you see more people talking about their roles as working for footballers or different types of athletes. So I suppose it's a space that's really growing. But yeah, I don't know if I thought I was on my own, but I definitely thought it was quite a niche role, which now I see is really it's really developing, and I think it's a really exciting area to be involved in, because I think teams and individual athletes are really seeing the need and importance of performance chefs.
Yeah, obviously, like I guess one of my observations is like a lot of athletes that have, if it's an athlete rather than team, if an individual athlete has their own chef, they're typically doing pretty well financially in their sport.
Yeah.
Similarly, if you're just an exec or a very wealthy, ultra high net worth individual that has your own chef, it's money that affords that sort of luxury service. I've sort of been in the concierge healthcare space with athletes and with high net worths, and what I've seen sometimes is that you have a chef that is, double, triple Michelin star, and the couple or the client, whoever it is, if it's a ultra high net worth person, they can just afford to bring in the best chef. How often, when you're sort of looking at the landscape of performance chefs for athletes, how often are you seeing a chef that is interested in nutrition from like a science and health perspective versus maybe the athletes just brought in a really good chef that makes delicious food?
Yeah, half and half. Because one client that I'm working with, he's a golfer, and he's had an amazing chef. Again, comes from a Michelin star place, and has been with the athlete for 7 years. And how I've been working with them is because the athlete also has a nutritionist, and they do a lot of blood work. And it's taking the results of that blood work and seeing how we can adapt his diet and dishes in a way that he's going to like it. But for that chef who has no, sports nutrition or nutrition background, it's translating it to a way in which a chef is going to understand.
Yeah.
So like, how are we going to put these different elements, and how is it going to create these different textures, and trying to get that chef to put on a different hat, so not looking at food in just a flavour way, where flavour, yes, it is the most important thing because it's why that person is going to eat something, but it also has to support them in the goals in which they want to achieve. So yeah, I think there is so many incredible chefs out there and working with, incredible people. And I think it's putting it into language that, like chefy language that they're going to understand, and also the power of simplicity. Because when you go out to eat at a restaurant, it's normally because they're going to cook you a dish which you can't create at home or don't have the time to create at home. But when you're cooking for an athlete or a team, and it's either in a home environment or in a hotel when they're away, there's such a power in simplicity, especially for an athlete, not to incorporate too many different things that could cause an upset tummy the night before a match, and it's to educate that chef in why we need to do certain things. So why the night before a match is carb loading important.
Yeah.
And to explain to that chef like what all these different elements and why you incorporate them and why you do things at certain times. And also on the flip side, when working with nutritionists, I think it's such a powerful kind of collaboration, because one client that I worked with got injured last year, and he doesn't eat, like dairy doesn't agree with him, and he doesn't eat nuts. And it was really important that he had a protein shake before going to bed, but he didn't like the pea protein that the club nutritionist had given him. So I was like, okay, we'll use silken tofu in his shake at night. So you've got frozen raspberries in there, silken tofu, so you've got that high protein content. And I was able to think like that, and the texture of how that's going to taste and what it's going to taste like. And the nutritionist was like, oh, brilliant, like job done. And, the athlete loved it. And I think it goes kind of both ways. It's really important for these amazing chefs to be able to keep their roles, but to also be able to educate and for that person to understand why you're doing certain stuff. And also, I think how amazing, because for that chef, the one thing that you don't want to happen as a chef is to feel stagnant in your role. And I feel if you are learning on the job and you keep learning, it keeps you inspired, it keeps you engaged. And yeah, what a great support if there is the chef in place and they do want to learn.
Do you find in that sort of situation they need to have, if they don't have a nutritionist that they're collaborating with, does it help them to have some form of nutrition app where they can look at the ingredients they're putting in and work out the sort of macros, micros, and the sort of like stats behind the food? Or
Um, I I think it's important for them to have an understanding. Yeah, I think that's really, really important. Because if not, you're kind of going in blind to something. You're not understanding the effects of why this happens, and there's so much jargon within, sports nutrition. It can be it can be confusing, and I think if stuff is put into layman's terms and it's done in a way in which somebody can look at that information and easily translate it, I think that's really, really helpful, and I feel like that's really supportive.
yeah, this probably is a good segue to get to a lot of these questions I've asked you so far are just unplanned, but this one's actually a planned question. Your role is closely linked to dietitians, nutritionists, especially in like a team environment. From your perspective, how can sort of effective collaboration occur between, say, the nutrition professional and the chef, assuming they're separate?
Yeah, I think it is really effective in building trust and just great communication. Like, I think really good communication. All the nutritionalists that I've worked with, the synergy between us has just been amazing because you're both able to learn, and your goal is the same. You're coming from the same places in a supportive role. You want that athlete, that team to thrive and to reach their goals. And I suppose it's working out a plan in a way in which how this is actually going to work, how you're practically going to apply it. And sometimes, say if I'm working with a team nutritionist and I'm working with the athlete in a home environment, it's how something will actually work in that home environment, because you're not just cooking for the athlete on their own. Sometimes it's with their family, and how do you incorporate that into family life? So I think it is a great collaboration. It's a very, very powerful one, and I think there's space on both sides to really learn and to really grow and be part of the team. Because when you're a chef and if you're working on your own a lot of the time, I think working with people, it inspires you again, and you're kind of mapping out a plan or problem solving together. So yeah, I think it's a really, really crucial partnership.
Yeah, for the sort of for the physios and the strength coaches listening, for them, I'm just going to speak on behalf of them. On behalf of them, if an athlete is fit, healthy, playing well, physically developing, meeting their sort of physical benchmarks, then the physio, the S&C coach, they're happy, they're patting themselves on the back. What for you is kind of tangible feedback that you're doing a good job as a performance chef?
How the athlete is performing, how are they recovering? A lot of the times, if they've just had a match, the sleep the night after the match is probably not great. They might not have been able to eat anything because, their adrenaline's going. So when they're in that kind of recovery stage, it's kind of engaging with them. Like I ask I mean, hopefully not too many questions, but I'll engage and be like, "How are you feeling today? What are you feeling like?" And we'll chat, and I'll be like, "Oh, how did you sleep?" And they might be like, "Oh, great, not so good." And I will definitely ask them questions of, like I just said, like, is there anything that you're feeling like today? And looking at what their training week, recovery week is looking like, or recovery days, not weeks, and how I can, look at their performance plate. What can I add to that? That is going to benefit them. Yeah, I think it's really tuning into how they're feeling. And also, I know this is going to sound a little bit weird, but what's their mood? What's the weather doing? Because all these different things are going to affect how they're feeling. What they're going to eat during the summertime is going to be different from the wintertime. The produce is going to be different. Like, how can we incorporate different, veggies, or like, are we going to incorporate a bit more fiber today? Like, how can we tweak these meals? Because one thing with working with athletes is they can get very regimented in the meals that they want, because like one football player I was working with, he was like, "What did I eat the night before that match?" I was like, "Oh God, that was a few months ago." I'll have a quick look, because he was, in his head he was like, "I performed so well on that evening. I want to replicate everything exactly the same." So, it's also building up trust with the athlete is a huge, huge thing, because I think it's really important for them to feel they are in control.
Yeah.
Because so many different elements of their life is controlled, and say you're working with them in a home environment, you want them to feel like they can ask you for any dish, and that you can really tweak that so it's going to work for their goals for the next day. Yeah, it's really important to build up that relationship with them. And I think even if everything is going right and they are eating really well, sleeping really well, there are things that are outside our control, like they could have had an argument with their wife or girlfriend, and how that affects, like what they're going to eat, and, the environment that you create at home. So I think it's more than just how they're performing, it's how they're actually feeling and tuning into how they're feeling. Because the next day they could get an injury, on in whatever discipline they're in. And if you've built up that good relationship with them, you'll know how to support them through that next phase as well.
There's a really good chance that, like, within the listener base for this particular episode and for our show, there'll be someone tuning in for this one in particular, a professional who's either at a team looking for a new chef for the team, or possibly trying to source a performance chef for one of their particular athletes. And I've kind of observed this a few times. What would you advise the sort of practitioner or the team that's looking for a performance chef? How would you sort of steer them on how they should conduct the search process and selection criteria of bringing in a chef for somebody or for them?
Yeah, I think it's for the chef, why they want to be there. What is it about that role that they find really inspiring or engaging? Because what you don't want to happen is that for there to be like a fan chef there, so someone there that just loves, football. It's great if they do, but you want somebody who really wants to be a part of that team and aid that team's goals. I think curiosity, to never stop learning within that role, because I think if you're always willing to learn and grow in that role, you will be unstoppable. Like you will absolutely be unstoppable because, you know, you will tune into those athletes or that team. You know, if the chef wants to chat to them, you know, like engage with like, you know, if it's an international team, where have they all come from, you know, like what's their signature dish, you know. I think to create a really good team environment where the communication between the chef and the athlete or team is an open one, so that the, you know, the athletes can go into the kitchen. I love it when they come into the kitchen, and like when I was cooking at the Olympics, you know, and some of the athletes used to come into the kitchen and be like, oh, Bri, you know, can we have this? Or I really loved that. Or like during the opening ceremony, I was in there and I was looking around the room, and I could tell that one athlete was really, really nervous. And I went round to all the coaches and asked what every athlete's favourite meal was, and made sure the night before their performance that was an option. You know, there was lots of different options, but I always wanted to make sure that whatever stage they were in the competition, that option was available for them, so that they felt the comfort, they were seen. Yeah, that's really important.
I've got to say, like, if somebody was going to work in sport and pick the most popular profession to belong to, like, it's got to be chefs. Like, any team I've ever visited or been at, the chef is always the most popular person in the room from an athlete's perspective. So, I've got a horrible curveball question for you.
Oh no, go for it.
There's this kind of I'm not a chef, but I'm just going to make this sweeping generalization. There's this sort of TV-esque persona of some chefs, right? Passionate chefs who, when their food is questioned, they don't love it.
Yeah.
If a team or somebody is recruiting a performance chef, obviously people when they're under interviews are under their best behavior, so you're not always getting the real them.
Yeah.
How can someone really effectively vet the open-mindedness of a chef in terms of they want to bring in a chef who's good, but is actually truly open? You know, anyone can say in an interview, yeah, I'm really open-minded to working with the nutritionist or receiving feedback or critique of my food, not from maybe a taste perspective, but from a nutrient value perspective. How can somebody vet the true open-mindedness of a chef?
How would they do that? I mean, I think a trial is a good place to start. And just gauging somebody's reaction, because being a great chef, you know, like it's such a personal thing, isn't it? Food is so personal to people. So a great chef to one person, the other person might be like, that was absolutely horrendous. So I think it's to not take things personally, and you're not going to get everything right all the time. Nobody does in all their roles, in all their jobs. And I think being a great performance chef is different from being a great chef. You've got a different hat, and it's to make sure that team is being not just fueled properly, but they're engaging with it. And say with a team, you're not just cooking for one person, and I think you really have to be able to look at how each person is going to be represented in that team. Like the easiest way I find is I always separate everything. So, you know, there's different proteins, there's different carbohydrates, there's different veggies, salad options. You know, how are you going to speak to that person? It's with colour, you know, and with colour, you're going to, you know, and different textures and different smells and spices, and you're going to speak to every single athlete. And I suppose, sorry, getting back to your question, how are you going to test if they're going to turn into a Gordon Ramsay is what you're really asking me. I think it is trial. You know, this is a newish area of what you're asking that chef. You know, because what chefs have had to think about before is, if you're working if someone's got a private chef, it's usually all centered around weight. It's centered around kind of if they've got family, children, who they're cooking for. And if it's in a restaurant, you're purely thinking about flavor. You're not think you can use as much butter as you want, as much oil, whatever you want, you can use it. In a performance kitchen, and when you are designing a performance plate, I think it's there, like you said, the ability to be open to why you need to use certain things and why it's more beneficial for them in a cooking's perspective to use something like water or bone broth to deglaze a pan, instead of using more oil or something that's going to be higher in calories and it's going to kind of subtract from the goal that you're trying to achieve. Yeah. So it's not questioning how good they are, it's just asking them to look at food in a different way, and if they are open to that. Yeah, and also, I think to be in that performance environment, a person you would hope that is going to apply for that job is like wants to feel good and does feel good themselves and is interested in, like, I love sports, I love being active and the way that I feel, and I know how personally, food affects me, and you want that for your team, for your athlete. You want them to feel like, yeah, they're unstoppable. So I think it's, just being open, reading them as in, have they got a curiosity to learn and why they actually want to be there.
How do you sort of navigate the sort of trade-off of supplements and nutrition? Because obviously, nobody wants to pay for a performance chef to come to their house and then they're just mixing a protein shake powder with milk or water, right? Like, it seems a bit ridiculous for that to be a big part of it. But obviously supplements do have a time and place. How do you navigate that or view it?
Yeah, I think supplements are really, really important, but you can't out-supplement a bad diet. And I think how it can sometimes go is that people try and supplement everything, but that's like you're trying to put the cherry on top of the cake, but you haven't baked the cake. So whole foods first, supplementation is really important, and there is definitely a place for supplementation. But also when you're working with athletes, like last year, one athlete had to undergo surgery, and so the periodization of protein was really important. They didn't eat dairy or nuts, and the nutritionists had given them a pea protein. They didn't enjoy that pea protein. They were like, Bryony, this tastes awful. And I was like, okay. So what I used in that sense was, or in that case, was silken tofu, because I knew that it doesn't really taste of anything. But as soon as you blend that in with, say, frozen raspberries or strawberries or, whatever your base is going to be, and dates and, chia seed, and then they weren't going to taste that. All the texture it was going to bring, though, was that lovely creamy consistency that, say, a Greek yogurt would do. But they were still going to meet that protein requirement that they needed. So I do feel like, again, it's really important for the chef to understand, about nutrition and how we can actually apply these different things instead of supplementation, because, your gut is going to respond so much better to a natural product, all your veggies, your fiber, everything like that, compared to supplementation. But again, when people don't, if you have a vegan or vegetarian athlete, supplementation is going to be really important to them and powerful, and there is definitely an area for that. But I do think, again, it's really important to start with whole foods first, and then, supplementation is that last cherry on top of the cake.
Another big sort of mainstream topic I want to kind of cover with you is like fads and trends. And if you're the strength coach, you're probably getting athletes asking about a particular training methodology that they've seen somebody else do. Or if you're the physio, maybe the athlete's requesting some new passive modality that they sit on the table and get because they've seen it online, or whatever. There's always these kind of like moves in the industry. Nutrition is rife, right, with fads and superfoods. I remember, almonds solved everything, then blueberries, then turmeric, and it seems to change every couple of years. What's the like wonder food? Not saying those things aren't good for you. How do you sort of navigate that? Because I'm sure athletes see stuff and then request stuff based on what they've seen on TikTok or Instagram.
100%. 100%. Yeah, it's a really interesting one because, say during the Olympics, before the Olympics, the year before, we did the test Olympics. So you do a mock Olympics basically. And even though it was the same athletes that I was cooking for, the gluten-free athletes the next year weren't gluten-free, and it's kind of all navigated around who they are following on Instagram and TikTok, and it's really powerful, and people will change their whole diets when they see certain fads or trends, and it's really hard because I think it takes the whole team, it takes the coaches, to really get behind it and for you to support each other, because unfortunately, when people jump onto trends, like during the Olympics, one of the female athletes, her favourite meal was spaghetti bolognese, and I could get 5 different veggies into that spaghetti bolognese, and she was carb loading, and that was just her ride or die meal. And somebody came up to her the night before she, was she had her gold medal match the next day, and they said, "Oh, aren't you worried about getting a glucose spike?" And the shocking kind of, they don't know anything about that athlete, and she'd had to change, she changed disciplines, and with that discipline change, where she'd had to, or she did under fuel before and had lost her periods and everything, now she had gained weight, got her periods back, was thriving, and the person who said that didn't know the context and didn't know who they were saying it to, and the way that bleeds in can have such a detrimental effect to people. And I think it's, like sports nutrition is very different from nutrition for the general public.
Yeah.
And when you apply it and you don't understand why somebody is doing something, it can have a really negative effect. And I think when I get asked a question, even to the point where, should I eat a watermelon that has black seeds and not white seeds? Because I've heard that if it's got white seeds, that it's not natural. And I'm like, okay. I think it's fruit, and I think that watermelon, if you like watermelon, is going to hydrate you, and you're going to get that really good benefits whether it's got black seeds or white seeds. But I do understand your concern, and I think it's not to kind of poo-hoo like anything that an athlete says to you, but I think it's to try and understand what aspects and what their concern is and where they are coming from, so that you can understand it and say why something is beneficial or why you would have it at this time, just to build up that trust, and for them to kind of realize that it may be something that they've heard on TikTok and has absolutely no scientific or medical kind of backing at all. But it is really hard for people in the nutrition kind of realm because there are there there are some cowboys and girls out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just industry wide, isn't it? It doesn't matter what your professional discipline is.
Yeah.
You sort of dread those moments where somebody says, "Saw this thing online." It doesn't it doesn't matter what the environment is. You know what might come out of their mouth next, and you know you've got a hard answer to figure out in the next few seconds. So
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah, I'm really aware of time. Where's the sort of best place for people to track you, find you, maybe contact you? What is like the channels that you live by?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, which is by Bryony. I am on LinkedIn, and then yeah, my website is www.bybryony.com. Yeah, always so willing to for anybody to reach out and to help in any way I can.
Cool. Well, I said it to you before we recorded, but this is probably only like our second or third vaguely nutrition like related episode. We've always got lots of injury and training related topics, so it's really interesting just to get probably a perspective in the industry that we don't get enough in terms of like your role and how that contributes to performance. So yeah, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.